say someone is experiencing a difficulty, maybe someone passed away they're close to, maybe they got an illness, maybe they lost a job, right? Something like that, right? And it's very easy for people to quickly say, oh, this person who died is in a better place, right? Like, very identity is like a box. I can only be a disciplined person. I can only be a confident person. I can only be a positive person. And if something shakes that up, who am I right now? I
Exactly.
lost my sense of self,
Mm.
right? Some common problems people come up with me to me with involve relationships, whether friendships, platonic relationships, or romantic ones. That's a big one. That's very common. How to deal with rejection, how to know whether a relationship is worth keeping or distancing. How to set boundaries, how to be assertive, when to leave a relationship that's maybe toxic and harmful, kind of thing. Doesn't have to be about solving problems, right? It can be a space for getting to know yourself, getting to know what are the different ideas and narratives you have taken into your life, the different ways you've learned to see yourself and see other people, because that can then impact your mental well-being, even if you don't have a diagnosable mental health disorder, but just how you feel about yourself, how you feel about other people, your own self-development. So I'd say therapy, it can be more holistic than just, okay, here's a problem, let's fix it. And many problems, honestly, are not fixable per se, all your five senses, right? So why is this important? When we are stuck in our worries, thoughts about past or future, we're no longer in the present, right? We're kind of just up here in our mind. We're no longer in our body. Our body is always in the present. It's not back there. It's not front, right? That's where our mind is going, right? Which then impacts our body and vice versa.
Uh, do therapists ever get tired of their jobs? Have you ever thought of switching your profession? Like, I'm tired of listening to the problems of people and nobody is listening to me. Or
Oh
do
my God.
therapists need other therapists? So, hi, welcome everyone to our new discussion. We have with us Miss Reema. She's a therapist and psychologist, and she also write a lot about psychology, mental health, and about personality and how we see ourselves in our daily life and what kind of issues young people are facing, and in usual also what kind of problems people have. So we welcome you here on our platform, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation. We are very grateful to you.
So thank you so much, Jessica. I'm really glad to be part of your program today.
Yeah. So, okay, do you want to add something in your introduction? Because I think I have just listed the major pointers. So, if you
Sure,
want to add
sure.
something.
Yeah, so I work here in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, as a counseling psychologist. I was trained in the USA, and I was born and raised in Dubai, but I lived in the States for 10 years. Came back in 2018. So I currently practice as a psychologist part-time and part-time as a psychology advisor for a mental health startup. So I do two jobs, one in an outpatient clinic and one for a startup.
Okay, okay, that's great. So I think we can jump into the questions that we have. So one of my first question is that is from your article. This is the first article actually I was reading of yours, and I was really able to relate with it. And I think a lot of people would be able to relate with the same because
Mm,
these days, we are so much pressured with this concept of positivity that we have to be
mm,
positive all the time. There is a
yes.
lot of content over the YouTube and at every platform that we see that you have to be positive.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter if you are in a job or in your personal life, whatever is going, you have to be positive and you have to be move on from the things. But though this concept is fine, that is how we can just move on in our lives. But you have mentioned a different perspective that we rarely see. You have
Mm,
mentioned about excessive positivity and how this is harming us, because obviously this is creating a pressure on us. In the context, what I was able to understand is that we are just ignoring our emotions in this whole blanket of positivity that we have to be positive, rather we are not accepting what we are going through. So how
mm.
would you explain excessive positivity and how it is impacting us?
Yeah. I'm not sure if I would really use the word excessive and but more like toxic, because what's excessive can be very relative to each person. But when positivity can become toxic is when we use it to bypass reality and what we're experiencing. Like so often you hear, I think, in both our cultures, right? Like when, let's say, someone is experiencing a difficulty, maybe someone passed away they're close to, maybe they got an illness, maybe they lost a job, right? Something like that, right? And it's very easy for people to quickly say, oh, this person who died is in a better place, right? Like very quickly. And maybe for some people it can help them, cope. But when we do it too early, it's like we are rushing from feeling the grief, allowing the grief to come and go at its own time, at its own pace, right? I mean, grief never fully goes away, right? But it has waves, right? So when we are trying to draw the silver lining so early, we're not allowing that natural movement of those waves of grief to happen for us to move through it. We kind of become stuck in some parts of that wave. So positivity can be helpful as long as we approach life from a both and perspective where we can acknowledge, okay, here's the stuff we can be grateful for, and we can also acknowledge, yeah, this part is tough. This part I'm struggling to figure out. This part I could use more help and support in versus I'm strong, I got it all together, I don't need anybody, right? Once we acknowledge our vulnerability, that's where connection becomes possible. That's where our humanity and intimacy becomes possible. When we're stuck on, oh, I have to always be positive no matter what, we're numbing a big part of our emotions, which is a big part of ourselves. And you're blinding yourself from getting to know a big part of yourself. And it's also people are not seeing the totality of you to fully connect with you.
Exactly. So what I can get from this concept is, like you
Mm.
explained, that we have to relate to ourselves, right? We have to accept what we are going through. Then only we can move on, rather just feeling positive all the time and ignoring our emotions and
Mm.
then pushing ourselves to be positive, right?
Right. I mean, there's the other extreme where we're dwelling on the difficult
Yeah.
emotions, right? Like that's also another area where people can get stuck. So there's a fine line between when we're completely dwelling within our emotions, we're so lost in them, and a whole perspective becomes colored in those emotions, versus when we can step back, witness them as they are, acknowledge them, like, yeah, this is really, really tough, and here's how it's impacting me right now. Here's how I can be more gentle and compassionate with myself, given what I'm experiencing right now. If that's hard, who are the people who can give me that compassion until I can do it for myself? Kind of thing, right? So there's a, I think when people hear this critique of positivity, their first word is, oh, I'm going to dwell on my emotions if I allow myself to feel. But that's not we're not just limited to options. There are more options in between.
Exactly. So my second question is also kind of related to that, but it also cover a bigger area. So one
Mm,
of your article was there about imposters, that how we all
mm,
are kind of imposters, right? So let's say if I think about myself that I am a positive person, right? So if
mm,
one day something happens in my life and then I'm thinking negative, like for day
mm.
of one, then I'll be pressured all the time that no, I am a positive person. How can I
Yeah,
think like that? Or
yeah.
let's say I have this idea of myself that I am a disciplined person and I am always on time, or I'm
Mm,
good in studies. So
mhm,
one day if I fail in a test, I'm going to feel really bad. My energy will be very down, that I'm supposed to be disciplined and hardworking. How can I fail in this test? So how
mhm,
do you related this concept of like how we
mhm.
all are imposters, and when we do
Yeah,
not meet those things, or we set
yeah.
ourselves on this pedestal that we are this, we are
Mm.
disciplined, we are hardworking, we are a positive person, and we when we do not meet those ends, how does our energy get affected, and how what are the long term impacts of all these things?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess one link between the two articles, which is interesting you noticed that link. The time when I was writing them, I wasn't thinking about that link very directly, like you were. But I guess when we are feeling pressure to live up to those supposed to's. I noticed that's a word you kept using, right?
Yeah.
Those things we have to be supposed to be. This idea that identity is like a box. I can only be a disciplined person. I can only be a confident person. I can only be a positive person. And if something shakes that up, who am I right now? I
Exactly.
lost my sense of self,
Mm.
right? So when you feel that feeling, right, it shakes up your sense of meaning and identity. And I'd say that is a long-term impact, right? So I do recommend taking a step back and being critical about what do you connect your identity with? You know, what is it being boxed into, and how did you learn that? You know, what personal experiences or cultural ideas, or maybe ideas from your peers or upbringing did you pick up on that taught you that, well, here's what my identity must be connected to in order for me to have some worth.
Exactly. So I think a lot of young people also go through this because I am able to relate with that. So
Mm.
let's say if I were good at my school, right? I got good grades. But later on, because then after that, I'm supposed to be very good at my professional life as well, right? I'm
Mm.
supposed to be at a very good company, which is paying me well, and I'm doing a really good work. So what happens with generally young people is those who are really good at school and after when they enter into their professional circle, so they send their CV to some place, some company. So what they think is they are supposed to be selected, right? But in any case, if they got rejected, there this the whole identity
Yes.
gets shaked. They're like, I was a good student, I'm supposed to be selected into this, and like, how can this happen to me? I always got good grades in
Right.
my school, then how can somebody reject my CV? But it
Mm.
sounds a very small thing, but at an individual level it affects a lot.
Yes.
It really affects a lot
Yes.
of people.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, it's interesting you mentioned that example, right? And the common reaction, how can this happen to me?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Like it's a very isolating experience when this idea of being rejected, things not working out for you, losses, whatever, it's all a part of our humanity. It's all a part of what it means to be human. And that's why I feel like we need to make more room for self-compassion rather than focusing so much on self-esteem. Because so often people link their self-esteem with stuff like that, their success, how well they're doing, how well they are feeling, and all of that. But then reality, we have life. We have moments we can become weak. We have moments we need others. We have moments we fail. We get rejected, right? That we're human. And I guess self compassion leaves room for acknowledging that humanity. I'm just one among many others. And that's a more expanded way of being versus, oh, why me?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Right. Since we are talking about the young people, right, and a lot of people who watch us are young. So, since you are a therapist, psychologist, and you write about all these issues, so
Mm.
what kind of issues that are there which young people deal with? Because a lot of young
Mm.
people must be coming to you and discussing a lot of
Yeah.
things. So, just if you could list few of the things that
Mm.
young people are dealing with, at least people who are watching us can validate it. At least I'm
Yes.
using the
Yes.
word
Yes.
validate because if I'm going through some problem and if other person is discussing that and if
Mm.
a professional is saying that, a lot of people go through that, I
Yeah.
feel validated, right? I feel like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
I am not the alone person, right, who is going through this.
Yeah.
So could you just list down few of the problems that young people are dealing with very quickly?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say most of my clients are young people, millennials, Generation Z, right? People between 17 to 30s, I would say. And um sorry, I think the voice got cut. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it was my
Oh,
voice.
okay, okay, no problem. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so some common problems people come up with to me with involve relationships, whether friendships, platonic relationships, or romantic ones. That's a big one that's very common. How to deal with rejection, how to know whether a relationship is worth keeping or distancing, how to set boundaries, how to be assertive, when to leave a relationship that's maybe toxic and harmful, that kind of thing, or maybe how to navigate it if it's still valuable, but there's aspects of it that is draining, right, for us. So that relationships are a very common thing. I would also say identity is a big one. I live living in Dubai. We have people from many different countries. Maybe like I forget what was the latest number, 100 or 150 plus countries who passed through here. Some people who grew up here, some who came for a few years and left, right? Many people moved countries and moved schools. So for some people, it's also about how to deal with transitions, especially when there are so many, how to trust getting close to people if we're going to move all of a sudden, or if people will suddenly leave us eventually. That's also a very big thing I keep hearing about. Confidence, the huge one, self-esteem. People get anxious about public speaking. I do as well. So
Right.
that's also a very common, almost universal topic, I would say.
Exactly.
Um, and interestingly, many people feel alone in their experience, right? They feel that they're the only ones, or one of the few people who um, are insecure about their bodies, how they look like, whether it's skin tone, weight, the texture of the skin, the hair, their language capacity is fitting in, right? But yet it's also quite a universal experience, but yet people feel so alone in it because we don't really encourage, I guess, talking about difficult emotions. We encourage so much positivity, positivity. Oh, you're supposed to love yourself. You're supposed to be positive. You're not never supposed to have these feelings. You're never supposed to have a day where you just feel down or blah or meh, or whatever it is. So when you have that, people don't talk about this stuff, and then naturally they'll feel alone in their experiences.
Right, right. So I think most of the people are going through the same problems.
Yeah.
But the irony is we all are vulnerable. But if I am feeling this kind of problem that I think my public speaking is not good or this or that, then I think like I am the only person and everybody is fine with that. I am the only one who is dealing with it. But
Mm,
when we look inside into it, when we look deep into it, everybody is going through the same problems, and we
mm.
are scared of those people who are around us. Like
Yes.
we are scared from those people who are exactly feeling the same problem.
Yeah. I would add also maybe some problems can be more stigmatizing than others, unfortunately, or past trauma of some sort, whether trauma was a one-time event or something that was going on, right, kind of thing, whether from families or from some other event that may have happened in their life that was traumatic. And when I say trauma, I mean anything that shakes up a person's sense of safety or sense of meaning in life, and that word is very subjective. So what one person may experience they may not necessarily see it as traumatic, whereas for another person it may have a different impact, and therefore that impact is what makes it traumatic, right? But the feelings and the experience is still real, right? It doesn't in any way minimize it. And what makes an experience especially traumatic is that isolation, is that stigma aspect of it, especially depending what kind of trauma was experienced. So I'd say even that toxic positivity, it impacts at this level as well. People's ability to be able to open up and find support uh,
Right.
on their traumas.
Yeah, right. Rather, they start covering up everything with this blanket of positivity that no, I
Mhm.
have to be positive, and just ignoring the fact that you are not feeling well. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, since we were talking about the young people, and you mentioned a lot of people come up with all these vulnerabilities that they have.
Mm,
And also, one of your article talks about the mental health or mental disorder and how
mm,
therapy is important. Since I mentioned young people also, so are young people find comfortable going for therapy, or do people have a lot of notions about this therapy concept? Because when we talk about like countries like Asia, specifically India, right? People have this notion that if until or unless you are going through a mental disorder, you cannot opt for therapy. Or
mm,
why to go for a therapy? Just talk to other people, you will be fine, right? This is this whole idea about the therapy. So, in your article, you mentioned that therapy is not only for people who are going through mental disorder, even for the day to day problems that we have or we are dealing with, like specifically the trauma you mentioned, right? We can go for the therapy. So, how
mm.
would you explain this? How can therapy solve a lot of problems that we are ignoring, that we are thinking that I think we don't need therapy because I'm not going through any mental disorder. But how, some problems can be only solved through therapy.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe one caveat I'd add is, therapy doesn't have to be about solving problems, right? It can be a space for getting to know yourself, getting to know what are the different ideas and narratives you have taken into your life, the different ways you've learned to see yourself and see other people, because that can then impact your mental well-being, even if you don't have a diagnosable mental health disorder, but just how you feel about yourself, how you feel about other people, your own self-development. So I'd say therapy, it can be more holistic than just, okay, here's a problem, let's fix it. And many problems, honestly, are not fixable per se, but therapy can still be a place for how can we navigate the problem? How can we make it such that the problem doesn't come in the way of the most important things in your life? Maybe it will always be there. Maybe it will be in the driver's seat of your car instead of being the one steering your whole car of your life, right? So that's at the very least what we could do with therapy, right? Because, say, for example, something like trauma, right? There's no way a person is going to completely, like, forget what happened, right? And for me to say, "Oh, you will forget what happened, you'll get over it," I'm lying to that person, right? And they'll know it. They'll not believe me, also. They'll know I'm bluffing. You don't have to be a psychologist to know that, right? But what I can help them with is, what do we do with the fact that that trauma has happened, and what can we do today? How is the trauma impacting us today, kind of thing, and how can we stay connected to what's meaningful to us, kind of thing. How can we grow from our experiences while also acknowledging the parts that still remain difficult.
Right, right, right. So I just got curious about one thing. We have a lot of information about the therapy and how mental health works, how we should think. Don't you think that this is actually? I just want to get your perspective on this. Don't you think the more technology and more information we are getting dragged into all those things? Because when we think of 100 years back or 200 years back, why people going through all these issues, or like we have this idea that at that time people uh, were not going through all these issues, or maybe we do not have that information of people that they must be going through because people never had platforms, right?
Yeah.
We had very few news of or information or articles, anything in the history that people went through. So what do you think, the more information we are getting, that is why we are getting into all this thing, or
Very good.
is it just normal? Or
Yeah.
is it just a problem that humanity always suffered?
It's a very good question. I mean, maybe I'll try to look at it from both sides, right? So maybe let's take the side where this is a universal human experience, right? I mean, we all experience death and loss, moving countries, or maybe not countries necessarily, but maybe moving homes, movement from childhood to becoming a teen to becoming an adult, right? Movement between jobs, movement in our relationships, where a friend used to be very close, now we became distant from each other, or the other way around, right? There's Life is filled with movement, and we do grapple with what does that all mean for us, even if we don't use the word meaning. So at least in some sense, we are struggling with that to some extent, kind of thing. So to some extent, there is some universal aspect, and I would also add that mental health is it's not only caused by one thing, right? It's more of a system of many things contributing to our mental health. A bit of our biology, right? Hormones, genetics, and these are brain chemicals, right? Neurotransmitters. A bit of our family upbringing, the home environment we grew up in. A bit our cultural background, what messages we are taught about emotions, and dealing with stuff in general, and resources and support are available in our culture or not available in our culture, experiences that are economic status, what was available, not available, to us, what supports were available or not, to us, a bit on experiences of oppression, whether for different kinds of reason, reasons. What kind of skill sets do we have? What values have been passed down, to us as we navigate all of that, in combination. So the idea that there is, uh, or in the past they had this and now we have this, right? I mean, technically, we've always had this combination of factors, right? But maybe some things that have changed is our socio-political realities, like modern day capitalism, right, has had a lot of people connect their self-worth with their accomplishments, for example,
Right.
in a way that
Most of
wasn't
the
as much
time.
the case as in the past, right? Um, and we also notice even both our cultures, right? I don't know how it is exactly in India, but I've noticed that even though I'm from a collectivistic culture, I find that because of today's economy, more and more people are moving out to a different city or town or even country for better work opportunities or better or maybe more affordable rent or something like that, right? Whereas before we lived in smaller communities. We had more of that support, even if we are struggling in some way.
Right.
Even if we might not always be financially at well off, we would have that network of support kind of thing. But of course, there were also problems back in the day. There were topics that even back in the day, we had no platform to talk about, as you said,
Right.
right? Like say, think about sexism. Think about sexual violence. Like till now we still have problems with talking about those, and back in the day we definitely had problems talking about those, even in the most supportive collectivistic societies, right? So I'd
Right.
say there's maybe it's to answer your question, it's both and maybe that in a
Yeah,
sense
yeah, actually,
having
yeah,
the platform, right, gives you more language you didn't have before. But I
yeah,
find that sometimes people might what I'm concerned about is what information is available, right? Is it more of the toxic positivity kind? Is it more of the other extreme where every single normal, difficult human experience becomes diagnosable when that may
right,
not be the case, right? Sometimes maybe there is a bad diagnosis, but diagnosis is not the only way to define your experience, right? An experience can still be difficult and doesn't have to have a mental health diagnosis in order for it to be validated, right? And to be difficult, right, for you.
right.
So yeah, I'd say it's a mix.
We discussed a lot of problems. Now we can come up to the solution. In one of your article, you discussed a very beautiful thing, which is very underrated and nobody considered it. Actually, my mother used to tell me, "Do this, you will feel better." But
Mm,
you never listen to your mother or the local information you have until
yes.
unless you just validate that thing from a professional, right? So you discussed about the gardening, how gardening can help a lot, but it actually
Mm,
does help. My mother was telling me from a really long time, but when I read your article, I started doing it, and it really helps a lot. I was able to think about the thoughts that I am having, like what kind of thoughts I'm
mm,
having, and just you see just plants growing and watering them. It's a different kind of peace, which is very underrated. So,
mm,
could you just explain it more to the people who are listening,
mm.
that how gardening can help?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do want to keep in mind that not everybody may have access to a space to
Yeah.
garden. There are ways to tweak if you have a smaller space, but I also want to fully acknowledge that it may not be accessible to everybody out there. But what a beautiful thing that your mother was passing down this value to you, right? This idea of gardening and how it's good for you. And I think it's a almost universal cultural thing. This idea
Yeah.
of gardening, relying on the nature for your food, right? Versus you go to the supermarket and you see things wrapped in plastic, you don't know
Right. And I think
where
I'm
everything came
fortunate
from.
enough to see my grandparents doing that and
Yes.
then my parents doing it. And then I am sitting in room and my parents are telling me that you whole day you are sitting in a room and how can you see a lot better,
Yes.
you have to get outside. So I think you
Yes.
can talk about this.
For sure, for sure. So I would say, for a lot of people, not everybody, but for a lot of people, gardening can be one of many ways that you're engaging all your five senses, right? So why is this important? When we are stuck in our worries, thoughts about past or future, we're no longer in the present, right? We're kind of just up here in our mind. We're no longer in our body. Our body is always in the present. It's not back there. It's
Mm.
not front, right? That's where our mind is going, right? Which then impacts our body and vice versa. But when it comes to the physical body, it's here. The five senses are here. Here's what I see, hear, touch, feel, right? It's all here. So sometimes it's not enough to tell ourselves, oh, just be present. Right? How often someone told you when you're worried, yeah, just be present and you'll be happy. It's very invalidating.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
doesn't work. It just plain does not work.
I'm just
But
listening from one ear and it's going outside from other ear.
yeah, exactly. I feel the exact same
Yeah,
in one ear and the other, exactly.
yeah,
So gardening and I'd say cooking or anything that involves your hands, right? Crafts, or movement, even dance, right? And I know in your culture you have many wonderful, rich history of dance and movement practices that are great for your mental well-being as well. Um, and like these practices, right, they engage your five senses. Gardening, you can smell the soil, the leaves, you can hear the breeze, feel the breeze if you're outside, the sun, whatever. You feel the soil in your hands, you feel the textures, and you are also watching, you see colors, the green, the fruits, the flowers. So you're fully in all your five senses when you're doing something like gardening. On top of it, it also helps you appreciate the how progress in anything in life is slow, even on
right.
mental health. So many people, especially here in Dubai, where it's a very fast-paced city, right? They come in to me with the expectation that I will fix all their problems in one session, two session, three session, when sometimes it can take much longer for people. We cannot rush your natural pace, and gardening can be a way of reminding yourself to slow down and appreciate the process. Because sometimes you try to grow something, it never sprouts, or maybe it makes it through a beautiful stage, it's very lush and green, and out of nowhere a pest disseminates it, right? So you learn to deal with losses, with rejection, with things just not working out. It can be symbolic of that, potentially, right? Not everybody makes that connection, but it can be a potential area to explore these linkages with the rest of your life if you're open to that.
Exactly, exactly. A very wonderful information you have shared. I think people who are listening can at least try. At day one or two, you feel a lot of changes. At least
Yeah,
those people who can access all these things.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I have lots of questions. Actually, I decided that I'll ask few questions, but the more we are discussing all these things, I have more and more questions. But we have limited time, right?
Yeah.
So the last question I want to ask, but I'm really hoping that in future also we can come up together and discuss more issues, right? So I have this last question. You have also written on it actually, and
Mm.
this was quite interesting. Uh, do therapists ever get tired of their jobs? Have you ever thought of switching your profession? Like I'm tired of listening to the problems of people and nobody is listening to me. Or
Oh
do
my God.
therapists need other therapists?
I mean, well, the last question, definitely therapists need other therapists. Like, I
Oh,
recommend anyone getting this profession. I feel you'll be doing more harm if you do not see your own therapist, if you do not do your own work.
right.
It doesn't matter if you're experiencing any active problems right now or not. Go to your own therapist, get that, space where you can get to know yourself better, notice what comes up inside you as you're working with people. So I believe ethically, every therapist should see their own therapist. And already in our profession, even those of us who don't, um, the younger therapists, especially those who are interns or just graduated, and then the process of getting licensed, they have a clinical supervisor who's basically like a mentor they see once a week, and they talk about the people they're seeing and how it's impacting them and all that and what they're learning. After that's optional if you want to continue seeing this person or not. But I believe everybody, no matter how experienced you have, I don't care if you have 20, 30 year experience, continue clinical supervision or see your own therapist. I think it's very, very valuable. In terms of do therapists get bored and tired? Well, I mean, we're human. We're not superhuman.
Right.
Like I think people they assume, well, therapy is just you sit down and talk. What's to it? I'm like, hon, have you ever tried sitting down for 4 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours in one day, 1 hour each person listening to the toughest moments in their life,
Right.
and they're not necessarily in their best headspace. They may not all be polite either, right? They're coming to you in their worst days. So imagine you're doing that every day, maybe a few times a day, even a few times a week, sorry, even, right? uh, it does take a toll, so that's why we need to have our own communities we're connected with, our own self-care practices if that's accessible, our own mentorship, our own therapy. Many therapists also work more than one job for this reason, to avoid burnout, right? They might do part-time, they're doing clinical work, seeing clients. Part-time, maybe they're writing, doing presentations, maybe they're teaching at a university, researching, or they have a separate side business that's unrelated to mental health, right? But I think that's important, right, to manage. There are people who are fully full-time, but
Right.
I personally feel it's best to have different focuses so you don't fully, burn out.
Right. And I think this is the most toughest job. Why? Because when a person is coming to you, they are in their vulnerable condition, right? And
Mhm.
you cannot just tell them, oh, okay, things will be fine, you will be
Yeah,
fine. You cannot just say that. When in friends we talk and one friend is coming up with their problem, you're like, things will be fine, this is how life is, and you cannot even say that. You have to deal professionally with it, right? And at the
exactly.
back of your head, because we all are human, and therapists as well, and they have their own problems as well. So I think that's why this is the most toughest job, but I'm very happy that you are not tired of your job, at least. Yeah. So thank you
I
so
get,
much for having this
I
conversation.
get tired days, but it's more, I notice it and okay, here's what I need to do about it when I'm having a tired day. So I don't want to make myself seem like I'm up
Right.
here. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right. So thank you so much for this conversation.